All right, welcome to another episode of the EsportsNext Podcast. It is my pleasure to be your host, John Davidson, alongside our lovely co-host, the founder of the Esports Trade Association, Miss Megan Van Petten. And today we have a special guest, Ben Smith, Research Manager at the worldwide leader in sports, ESPN. Thank you for joining us, Ben.
Thank you very much for having me. Very, very excited to spend part of part of the day with y'all, and obviously looking forward to the big conference next month.
Absolutely. And people might say, well, how did you guys get connected? How did you meet? Traditional sports, esports. Well, we all met in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, at the University of Alabama. And Megan was a board member of an event there. I was privileged to be a panelist, and the keynote was our guest today. And we're just so had such a great experience hearing you speak and learn so much, and just very thankful for you to get involved in ESTA as a speaker at our conference coming up in July in Chicago, and also join us today.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, honors all mine. You talk about just meeting in Tuscaloosa of all the gin joints in all the worlds. Yeah, getting a chance to work with both of y'all at the conference in Alabama was truly it's been a high point of my career personally, and sort of the marriage of what they're doing down there, combining their interest in sports, in gaming, in esports. There's a lot of just very strong overlaps and parallels and sort of shared interests within, I think, these communities that have always made them a natural fit. And yeah, I'm super excited to continue to extend my interest and expertise into this world that I've always been a huge fan of, but certainly am excited to again have a chance to be part of the conference and kind of build these connections and relationships with you and within the industry as well.
Absolutely. Well, as I'm looking at your background there, for those who are listening, Ben is sitting here in a beautiful man cave, only rivaled by Dan Patrick, probably. And there are a number of things behind you. I'm going to ask you, what, other than the Yoshi stuffy, which my son has in his room as well, give me your single most cherished item there behind.
Oh man. Let's see. All right, so I have two. All right, okay. So the answer I have to give is that behind the Yoshi, I actually do have a set of Waterford Crystal champagne flutes that were a wedding gift to me and my wife. So have to start with that one as a treasured possession. Those come out around anniversary time. The selfish answer is over there is actually a bowling trophy I won at a team bowling event last year. We all went and did a team offsite that was finished with bowling. I am by no stretch a really good bowler. I was just on that day. I posted the best individual score. I think I don't know, like 180 something. So I
Nice.
think that was my personal best. So that was that. But honestly, a little more germane to, I think, what just thematically, gaming or esports or anything like that. Up on the second shelf, I have it's a tin that has a 7 CD set of the Distant Worlds Final Fantasy orchestra music. So
Wow.
I've attended a few of the concerts that they've done. Most recently, they were in Hartford in March. But that, if we're talking about any sort of like game franchise that I've followed for as long as I can remember, I've been playing Final Fantasy games since I was 6, so that's 31 years ago now. And
Yeah.
the music specifically is, I think, if I have any sort of like core emotional tie to anything, it's a lot of the music from that series I think gets me. So I think out of all the stuff I have, I think that's probably, and that was also, again, that was a very thoughtful Christmas gift one year from my better half. So it was one of those where it's like, yeah, she gets it. Like she buys into all of the stuff around me, including the also my wall of Pittsburgh Penguins memorabilia as well. That if they were better this year, the last couple of years, that might have been my answer. But
Yep.
yeah, that's probably a different podcast topic altogether. So yeah,
Perhaps.
got a lot of
We'll
stuff
follow
in
up
there.
on episode 2, a
Yes, yeah,
deep
exactly.
dive into the office there. Well,
Yeah.
people may say, well, how does this, guy doing research for ESPN, how does this make sense with esports? And, from our relationship, the conversations we've had, Ben, it's really that you're a lifelong gamer. I understand that you are a avid Overwatch player as well. And, tell me, as ESPN, recognized esports and, you're doing, traditional television, traditional sports and stuff. What was that like for you when you heard gaming was coming onto the radar with your employer?
So it was really cool. So before I worked in research, I did work in programming and acquisitions. I spent close to 3 years on our digital media team, and this was sort of back in the days before ESPN Plus. So this was ESPN 3 and the sort of the digital extensions of our linear product. But I was privileged to work with my boss at the time, still at ESPN. His name's Kevin Lopes. He's now over on the business development side, but he helped spearhead bringing a lot of things to digital first.
Hmm.
And a lot of that was at the beginning, some esports type stuff. And that varied from, early days of getting, even some of it was just simulcasting things that were available on Twitch. But in the late teens, we did have, certain linear tent poles. The first ever Overwatch Grand Finals was put on ESPN. We had aired, footage from Evo a couple of times on our networks.
Yep.
And then even as part of our partnerships and relationships with a company like EA Sports, we had both Madden programming on there that wasn't always esports focused. Some of it was just a little more, gaming focused.
Sure.
But also the EA Sports, the FIFA World Cup. We had put some of that on the air as well. And so I got to work with our programming team in launching some of that stuff. And then there was some overlap of when I became a researcher. Esports was one of my purviews when that came up as well. So for me, it was absolutely a kind of just like a marriage of, again, an interest that I've had as long as I can remember in video gaming, but also being a part of an industry that, in an esports sort of genre and category that certainly didn't start in the mid-teens, but really I think that's when a lot of stuff really started to ramp up, and and it felt very cool
Hmm.
to be part of something so new, to be honest.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. And you're so deep into the research and what's coming. What do you think would surprise most people about your research that you present at Esports Next?
So I think what folks might not, I'll say it's on two paths. I think this is probably a lot of stuff that folks in the industry understand, but would probably be a surprise to folks that are not, and I don't want to say in the bubble, but because that makes it seem more niche than it is. But the esports fan and the esports consumer at its fundamental base is a sports fan and is a sports consumer. We have lots of research that spans individual sports. Actually, one of our biggest resources is a partnership we've had with a firm that goes back 30 years tracking individual sport fandom. And they measure, I think now it's 35 individual sports, including esports being an all-encompassing one. And one of the things that we can look at is, this is where the researcher in me really starts to nerd out. We can get into the Excel documents and the crosstabs and everything that shows overlaps, and you can get as granular as, well, what percentage of esports fans are also avid figure skating fans? And I might not have that number off the top of my head, but when you look at these matrices of what, where are there overlaps, the esports fan over indexes more so than a lot of other of the individual sport measurements. This is one where the esports fan is a fan of the big, the NFLs, the NBAs of the world. And I think that's probably something that folks might not have realized 10 years ago or 5 years ago, where again, you might just think, oh, well, it's, you're focused on playing a game or watching another person play a game. You might not have the same interest in your traditional sports, but at the end of the day, isn't it, if you're watching people compete, you're just picking a different sport in this case to do it with. So that's always been something that we've sort of recognized from a research perspective, and also knowing that from a profile perspective, you're looking at a consumer and a fan who is both young and technologically fluent. And as the TV industry evolves and it's more streaming focused, and every new major rights deal that comes up and is reported, there's more and more things going to streaming exclusives or simulcast on a streaming platform. It was esports that's been there first. Again, in the days of Twitch is building its huge brand. If anything, some of the traditional sports probably could learn from the way that the esports consumer interacts with the big products there, versus how the industry has historically measured and evaluated performance.
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect because, gamers are innovators of technology, and it's always kind of been on that bleeding edge of, streaming. You still have traditional sports tied to traditional television, and esports is kind of only existed on digital, right? A few months ago, I was at an event and Jerry Jones Jr. was the speaker. And one of the people there asked him a great question. They said, man, the Cowboys have 100 companies and they're doing all these things. And, he's somebody who has multiple roles. And they said, what keeps you up at night? With all of this success and all the things you work on, what keeps you up at night? And his answer was the next NFL TV deal. And it was because of streaming. And so one thing that I've evaluated when you look at revenues in esports, partnership revenue is by far number one. And the reason is we don't have those traditional TV deals that are billions of dollars in a decade long, right? And so it's super interesting to me that, rather than simply critique the esports industry to say, why don't you have these media rights deals? When I heard that, my mind was open, like, man, the people who have these media rights deals are freaked out in the next cycle when things go more digital and away from these traditional contracts. I know it's a very broad question, but what is your take on that dynamic?
I mean, I do think that the last 10 years is probably good, but certainly any deals that have come up and renegotiated in the last 3 to 5, that has now, it's just the streamer aspect, the digital only aspect is now, it has to be baked into the calculus for any of the legacy media companies but also for the leagues as well. And if you are a league partner, if you are one of the big sports associations, you're obviously open to play ball because you're still getting you're still receiving your rights fees from a streamer that's getting involved, or if it is an NBC or a Disney who has a Peacock or an ESPN Plus, those things are contemplated within the strategies. But what it ends up becoming is it becomes, I think, a question of access then, where it's you're in a good way making your product available in a lot of different places, which I think ultimately is a good thing. I think that has always been one of the appeals to me of esports, where it is you have a title you like or a team you follow, you can very easily find a live stream, or you can follow along with their own proprietary streaming, or again in single individual player, an athlete you can go right in with. With that, I do feel that even though the tent might be opening to different pathways, more and more spots you can find it, it's in a way, you're fracturing the ecosystem, where if you are someone that likes to sort of eat the whole hog, and you are, I want to watch every single NFL game I can get my hands on, that's a
Mhm.
little more difficult now in 2024 than it was in 2019. So
Right.
I think it's certainly a balance of, the league should be happy that they're getting more interest from them, and should be happy that folks might be able to access them, from a lower price point, an easier price point, depending on where it is you're trying to watch a game. But at the same time, they're going to have to then start with the reckoning of, well, you might get some pushback where, and I think we saw this a little bit. A great example would be in the NFL playoffs this year, when Peacock aired their exclusive game. A lot of social media was, why isn't this game on NBC? What's Peacock? And where. So I
Yeah.
do think that, while that's a world that, like, esports doesn't necessarily have to reckon with, because they've lived in it for so long, that's
Mhm.
where these, I think, legacy, leagues and media companies are starting to evolve their thinking, and where they're going to
Yeah.
have to be conscious about, in all of the next rounds of rights deals, where you're going to have to retrain, a customer base that, for 60 some odd years of modern TV, has been able to flip on and channel change and find what they need. And that's just no longer the case, in today's deals.
Yeah, I actually had that experience. I was at my mom's house visiting her yesterday,
I
and
was just thinking about that.
her and my stepdad were trying to watch the game 2 of the NBA Finals, and it's on ABC. It's also on ESPN as well, but there's no longer, they just have Roku. They
Yep.
don't have these other things, and they don't have traditional cable or whatever. And it used to be, yeah, these are the free channels, right? And everyone gets to watch this. And now it's like, I either got to sign up for something new, or I've got it, but I've got to go through this whole activation aspect of pulling up my account and my password and everything. And somebody in their 70s who's not as digitally savvy as, your 17-year-old
Yeah.
has a hard time tuning
Yeah.
in.
Absolutely.
Um, you know, Something that, I just love about this conversation is simply how, as we're going through this market correction in esports, there's a lot of critics and are saying, hey, you guys just need to, you
Yeah.
know, you need to adopt the best practices of these traditional industries. And there's some truth to that. But what I also love is there's a lot that the esports industry can teach the traditional companies as well. You talk about the streaming environment, and that esports has only existed in the streaming environment. And, there's been a couple tries with certain networks who have tried to plug esports into the traditional model. But I'm curious of your perspective on what esports can learn from traditional media, but also what traditional sports and traditional media can learn from esports in engaging with gaming or with streaming.
So, okay, that's a great question. So I think I can tackle it on what can traditional learn from esports probably, better and more clearly. I think that one of the incumbent advantages for the esports industry, that, you know the the bigger boxes can learn from, the legacy ones, is, I feel like there is just much more. You can forge a much cleaner connection and a more authentic connection, an esports title, an esports team, an esports athlete, or honestly, or even sponsors are in the space, or people that are, on the periphery. You're able to, I think, make better and more authentic connections with the consumer, more so than, a league can. I think that just comes with a little bit of what we have already talked about earlier, where it's, be it the fact that you can, watch your favorite streamer on Twitch do, not just game, but they're, an IRL stream, or even just chatting with
Right.
people. Like, that's a connection that, when we look at indicators of fandom and long-term indicators of fandom in legacy sports, having a favorite athlete and having a favorite team are huge predictors of how far and how long you'll stay with a sport.
Mm.
And and I'm sure there's absolutely some, esports fans that do just love a title. Like the same way that, yes, there are fans that will just love the NFL without following a team or a player. But I think that makes it harder to kind of go with the ebbs and flows of how a team can do, or when a player retires, like what happens then if that's all you had. I think
Right.
that esports, again, now, especially when you have teams and organizations that are playing in multiple titles, like you ideally do have, and I mean, in some cases you have the athletes themselves that are able to play in multiple titles. There's no Deion Sanders anymore who could play two sports.
Right.
You
Well,
can't play.
formal, I would say formal from Optic Gaming has gone from Call of Duty to Halo quite successfully, but
Right.
that would be
No,
he's about as rare as Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders as
I
well.
mean, that is fair. I mean, I guess maybe to be that good, there is still, you're a unicorn.
Sure.
But so I think that's one where the bonds that esports has with the individual players, because at the end of the day, it's like I'm able to play Overwatch and it's the same game that the pros are playing. You couldn't drop me in any of their games and expect me to
Right.
do anything, but I at least am doing it. And it's like, yeah, we've all kicked a soccer ball around. We've all gone to the park and shot hoops, but like I don't think there's the same connection there. So to me, it's like, and because of that, I think esports is able to more effectively market to its consumer base. Whereas me, like
Mhm.
I buy, I buy a ticket for a local sporting team or a team I follow, and then, it's relying on them to web scrape all of my available data, and then like I get bombarded with 18 marketing emails in a month about when you're coming back. And it's like, I understand at the end of the day, if you are an esports team, organization, whoever, like, yeah, you want to be profitable and you want to do that, but at least the way you're able to, I think, engage with the fan and engage with the consumer is more authentic than,
Yeah.
again, I buy a jersey from Fanatics and then all of a sudden I get a whole bunch of random things that are related, and I know it's because they handed off my info somewhere else. So to me, I think
Yep.
that's a good example of where I think the traditional, organizations can learn and adapt from what esports organizations are doing. On the
Mhm.
flip side of it, I honestly, I don't have a great answer right off the top of my head. I would say that some of the advantages that esports have, or maybe the things to like, because again, esports have been able to, I think, more success paths in recent years, whereas, we just talked about how there's a lot of old molds that the traditional organizations and leagues are learning how to break out of.
Right.
So that would have been the angle I would have tried to start thinking about, but I'll probably have to just have a better answer for you in Chicago for that one.
Yeah. No, that's perfectly fine.
I
Good.
love like the not knowing, the gray. Like that's what's so exciting about this industry, is the
Figuring it out.
true, like the journey.
Well, I think something too that I was thinking from your answer, Ben, that popped to the top of my head about traditional sports compared to esports is one thing is for the first time in generations, probably what kids are into there was not their parents' life experience when it related to sport. Now this generation, like people our age, who grew up gaming, we're starting to now like, oh, I grew up playing certain games, and so I'm sharing that with my child. But older parents or a generation before, it's like, wait a minute, my kid is into this thing that I don't know anything about. I can't relate to them. It's intimidating because I feel like an idiot, like sucking at this game rather than my father threw a baseball to me in the backyard, and I have all these wonderful memories. And so now me and my son throw a baseball, and then his son and him do the same thing. And I think that's one interesting dynamic is the shift in that. Now, starting with just this generation moving forward, you will have gamer parents who grew up gaming and doing the same thing as their kids, albeit you'll have some different games. The other thing that is interesting, gamers follow individuals much more than teams. And a big part of that is because historically teams have not been located to a city
Right.
until Overwatch League came around, and Call of Duty League has adopted that model as well. And there's been a lot of debate on does that make sense or whatever, because we're just like, I'm like, I grew up in Northern California, so I'm a Niners fan and a San Francisco Giants fan. But gamers are gonna say, nope, I like this player, and when he moves to a new team, his 2 million followers go with him as well. And now I'm a Team Liquid fan when before I was a FaZe Clan or whatever, whatever example you want to use. And so I think those are really interesting aspects. And I'm curious, you may not have come about this, but I'm curious in your research, have you seen anything with younger people with fandom of players over teams in recent years?
So that specific dynamic of it, we can absolutely drill into, and I don't have it off the top of my head. However, the lower affinity for individual players has been a theme over the past 10 years of our trending data.
Mhm.
The one sport we always have used as a use case for this is baseball.
Okay.
Baseball already a sport that does have a much more regional aspect to it, both from a fandom and viewership bent, is before basically once Derek Jeter retired, he was the last individual athlete in MLB that broke above, I want to say, even like 4% of the national audience saying that they're his favorite player. And that's how we couch this. The question gets asked is, who is your favorite player? So,
Got
I
it.
could be a fan of a bunch of players, but in this case, that's how we qualify this. And then, but before that, it was, you had Ken Griffey Jr., you had David Ortiz, you had Alex Rodriguez, you had Barry Bonds, you had Mark McGwire, you had a whole litany of players going back into the 90s that got to a national level that, Jeter was sort of the last of that. Even in the years that followed Jeter, Mike Trout in his prime, who was by all measurement, a Hall of Fame caliber, one of the best to ever do it, never was able to break like higher than 2% of that number. Now, granted, part of that, there's a lot of things.
Shohei Ohtani in recent years.
Ohtani was very much the same way, and I mean, he and Trout, part of it was lack of team success, lack of being able to get to the postseason. And I do think some of the unfair criticism around the MLB players, where they're very team focused. There's not a lot, they don't self promote in the same way that an NBA or an NFL player does.
Yeah.
Right. The only guy recently that broke the mold was Aaron Judge, but that's also a combination of you put the player who's hitting the most home runs in the biggest market. And so that helped unlock that in recent years a little bit more. But that's been something that, as long as I've been in research, we've known is a potential lookout. And so because of that, even on the NBA side, there's LeBron and there's Steph, who are so high that they are off the screen, and then the pack underneath them is just really clustered. And the NBA being one of my properties, we've looked to see, all right, who's going to be the next person to break through. And every year it's someone a little different. Like, could it be Giannis? Could it be Luka? Could it be Jason Tatum? For the 6 weeks where the Timberwolves were in the playoffs,
Anthony Edwards,
could it be Anthony? He got, all of a sudden, if they had advanced to the finals, we were ready to put the crown on him as the heir apparent. So
he is my son's favorite player after that series.
Okay,
well, the Nuggets. All of a sudden, Johnny's like number 5. Anthony Edwards, he's my favorite player, and we're watching all the all the highlights, and also the fact he's identical to Michael Jordan in looks.
Yep.
But just all the things, like all of a sudden my son is a huge Anthony Edwards fan, and we live in Dallas and he plays in Minnesota.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's how you learn about a player sometimes.
Yeah.
But because of all of that, like the through line there is that we know that just the specific correlations with individual players have sort of atrophied over time, Whereas I think we've seen still fairly steady team affinity. So on those broad trends, I would actually say that player attraction has sort of been a little bit lower. But but again, that's also at the national scale, and cutting it at a younger demo could certainly unearth a little bit of that. That was one of the pieces that when I presented in Alabama was we do know that broader sports affinity in that like 12 to 24 cohort is showing some softness for the first time. And that's not necessarily driven by any one factor. I think it's just there's now so much more available in sports and outside of sports that your interests just become it's a lot easier to follow things that you're more interested in. You're not maybe necessarily forced to just default to, watching a traditional sport. So there are some markers among the younger fans that, to your point about, there's going to be gamer parents, and there's going to be, I hope to be one of those. My 7-year-old, we gave her her Switch last year, and she's building up the things that she likes. We certainly, know that that's going to be the bellwether for future years and future generations of fans of not just, the traditional sports, but for esports as well, and how those interests align or depart from all of the other things that we track in terms of what's taking up your free time.
Yeah, well, I think a huge aspect of why, gamers love the individual players or streamers is the access to them, and so they really, you're seeing a lot of behind the scenes, these influencers are so digitally connected, they're streaming just about every day for hours and hours and hours, and very, very vocal on social media, et cetera. And so you're gaining a connection with them because of all the content. I want to take you back to one of the things we were discussing earlier about gamers over-indexing in traditional sports. And I'm curious, is this the case of gamers are actually like core gamers who are gamers first are also interested, or is it that gaming is now so popular that all of these traditional sports fans are also gaming? Is there anything in the research that bears out one or the other?
I mean, that is a great way to sort of dig into it, because in some cases they do seem to be, it can be ubiquitous right now, where you have the interests that align so closely. So from everything that I can remember from the research that I've looked into, you do have it as like sort of these, like, it does seem to be there is a genuine interest in esports as a, a competitive endeavor, not just as a, gaming is so widespread. I do think it does tie back to the access points we've talked about, where it's, I can pick up a copy of Overwatch and I'm playing the same game. But I do think that, because I think there is just this ultimate, desire to watch the people that are very good at this, and that, or in the case of something that, again, an esport title has that the NBA might not necessarily have, is, you can watch, like, essentially tutorials about how to get better. If I want to all of a sudden pick up Call of Duty and try to get good at it, I don't think I have the fast twitch to be able to do so. But like, I could certainly invest a lot of time in that, and I could watch the best players, knowing that maybe I can pick something up from it in a way that, I'm not going to grow a foot all of a sudden to be able to. I mean, I'm also I'm also late 30s, so I might already be retired in the NBA. So maybe not the best, although I'd certainly be retired in esports too, I think, based on the makeup of those teams too. So I do think it's not just that gaming has become so popular and so, so broad. I think I do think there are a lot of just genuine ties and genuine interest in the titles, as they have become so popular and just become, part of the zeitgeist again, especially among a younger cast of fans, where it's,
Mhm.
I mean, I got exposed to, in college, like that was when, Halo was really making an impact just as a game itself. But, I was one of those that would go and you'd do a 6-hour LAN party, and you would just be in a room with, you know, 20 other guys, just a bunch of TVs set up. And, that's kind of that's
Tape that
the,
sheet to the ceiling and the wall.
Yep, exactly. Like I mean, that's the embryonic stage of all of this, where you're competing and you're doing it with friends you like, and then the natural progression of it getting to the point of these high level elite athletes, I think is just kind of the sort of the natural progression of it. So I do think it is sort of genuine, but again, it certainly helps that the esports titles themselves now are such part of the fabric of, again, people from ages, as young as 6 or 7 up through college and beyond.
Yeah, it's interesting. Luka Doncic shares your love for Overwatch, and he's, one of the main fixtures of the biggest event in sports currently this week.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Yeah. It's not lost on me that, someone that's top 500 in Overwatch is now also, an MVP candidate in the NBA every year. That to me is, pretty incredible. I'd like to know which one of those he's more proud of at this point, to be honest.
yeah, well, fewer injuries in Overwatch, I'm sure.
Speaking
Yes.
of competitions, who's in the lead between you and your brother?
So my brother plays more than I do. He does
I think
not
we got our answer.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, so
Never mind.
no,
Let me
no,
give you the context.
no,
He doesn't have a
so,
job.
no,
He's at home.
no. He's got a job, but no kids. Although again, that doesn't stop me. I carve out my time at night. That is how I unwind, is by playing something. I'd like to think that I am better at my best player in Overwatch here, Zenyatta, than he is at his. So, because I've been a Zen main for 8 years. Like, I have not deviated, and
Wow.
I would get into the competitive modes a little bit before I had kids or when my kids were young, but I got to a point where it's like, there's enough stress in my real life. I don't need to be on headset having random people yell at me. So, so I don't. So me and my brother, we do play, we play a lot of, quick player or mystery heroes in that mode. He, though, broad scale is better at the title than I am, but I'm no slouch when I'm able to play my main hero. But yeah, that's replaced the weekly phone call for me and my brother as the
That's
way
cool.
we stay connected, and really has been for, again, the better part of 8 years. He was recently, again, the advantage of not having kids, he was recently away in Europe for like 10 days. And when we got back playing, it was genuinely like, oh, this is nice. I missed that. So and then I have an even younger brother that he and I don't play anything online together. But when we do get together, usually first thing we do is it's either a game of FIFA that gets spun up, or we end up playing an old Mario game, Mario Golf or Mario Party. So it's an interesting tie that binds us, but it's certainly a core fiber in my family that I'm hopefully extending to my kids as well.
That's awesome. So while your brothers may be better, at least you're your parents' favorite child. So you've got that going for you, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
And you remind them of them every time they beat you in a game.
Yes, 1,000%.
We've touched on some of the difference and similarities with gamers and traditional sports fans here. Obviously, the ability to be digitally native, or the experience being digitally native, and also the viewership habits of, digital versus traditional TV. Are there any other interesting differences that you've realized through your research between traditional sports fans and esports fans?
So I will say that some of the biggest similarities that we've seen are, like, hey, listen, these are ultimately big time consumers and investors in not just the things that they're interested in, but we're talking about just they're willing to spend. They're, again, that's also a pretty big indicator of some of the fandom stuff is, not just are you watching it, but are you, is your discretionary income, is part of that allotted to what you're doing. And so that ends up being one of the biggest things that I think is, again, especially for folks that, companies, buyers that might not be as familiar, haven't yet dipped in. It's like, you're still dealing, like, don't, like, you can't have it be the stigma that it's a kid in someone's basement, or in their parents' home. It's like, these are the people that once they are able to start making their own decisions, they are out there and sort of willing to invest in the same way that, an avid NFL fan would. So that's always one thing that I always look to, in terms of, what, where can you make those ties and those overlaps in interest, and also the way that when you ask about how they prioritize their free time and what they do with it, that's a big piece of it too. As far as some differences, I think one of the key ones, I mean, it is honestly the sort of the technology gap and where you can be found, where you can be reached as a fan and a consumer. This was, as you guys know, this was part of the keynote I gave in Alabama, but, I think it's for consumers under the age of 50. So we're not even talking about the kids anymore. ESPN, like, its digital presence is as, ESPN is actually thought of as a multi-platform company, more so, or as much so as it is a legacy TV thing, or a legacy TV.
The executives love that, I'm sure.
They do. And I think that's where, again, when we talk about why is an esports fan consumer important and why are they attractive, and again, not even just the sports fandom piece, it's that all of the questions about how frequently do you use technology, are you on social media, do you stream, like, do you play video games? All of those indicators are much heavier for the esports fan. And again, in a world where we know how the industry is evolving from a legacy TV standpoint, it's been 13 straight years of reducing subscriptions to cable and satellite, some of it offset by your YouTube TVs and, your DMVPDs, as we call them. But that pond is, like, that universe is not getting bigger of how you're, I still subscribe to Xfinity cable, but I even might be jumping ship this summer, just based on what's available and what the budget is.
Yeah.
So, like,
Look at that.
I'm people, like, it's a shrinking pond, whereas the others, like, again, we talked about this back in the rights deal conversation, like, with the added streamers that get added in, or this, like, joint venture that Disney is expanding in with Warner Brothers and Fox to bundle sports together. I mean, we're all heading back towards cable.
I was gonna say, it's like we went from cable to streaming back to cable again. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, everything's a bundle. Everything's a bundle again now. So it's it's going to just be a 15-year cycle, I guess. But, like, it is now, it's easier to get in if you want to at a lower level, but one that does require some. Again, it's not as technologically fluent as, it's probably, I could teach my mom how to do it. I could say that much, but you're working with a generation already that knows how to do that, knows how to navigate in that space. And that's one that it's still a pretty big fundamental difference that we would absolutely expect to see that as those folks, as the Gen Zers and the millennials are aging into the groups of parenthood and further. But, you're still, again, traditional TV is still really driven by viewers over 50. Whereas, you look at the available data on not just proprietary streaming, but, like, you can pull ESPN's ratings and see who accesses it from, like, a connected TV, and that connected TV share and things like that that includes your Apple TVs, that includes Roku's. It's not just the TV set, but it's like that creeps up every year too. So that's the base is getting more fluent just as those folks are growing into it. But,
Yeah.
you know, an esports sort of fan still has that huge advantage. There's still a pretty big technology gap that, you know, I think is still a pretty big difference.
And that journey is so fun to explain to people, from playing video game in the basement to these are your influencers. These are your, you know, early adapters. These are
Yes.
this is who you want to meet, or
Yes.
this is who you want to educate. Yeah, this is our next generation of leaders. So I remember when John and I were sitting down with our team and we were putting the goal of this conference together. And one of the very first things that we wrote was, let's get someone from ESPN to keynote. And do you remember that, John?
Mhm.
And we were so glad to meet you. And we're so happy that you're advocating as such a passionate player and somebody that can represent this industry so well. And moderating the panel of the state of esports. It's just such an honor to have you, and it's going to be such a rich, you know, information of topics
Yeah.
and research. So thank you so very much. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what's coming as we round out our hour?
As far as just what we're going to be talking about
Yeah.
on the panel. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you know, I think we're going to be trying to tackle this not just from a perspective of like, you know, you can look and see what, you know, what the big titles are. You can see what sort of, you know, Twitch metrics are available. You can like look up viewership, and that's my day job anyway. Like that's, I'm going to be happy to, I think, to break out a little bit of that. But, you know, I think ultimately we want to be able to talk about some of the things we talked about here, like esports, the fact that it's so much more accessible today, you know, and continues to be, how important that is to continue to grow the industry, grow the base. You know, I want to be hearing from, you know, with Marco and with Lavelle, who will both be part of it, is, you know, they're coming up from it from very different perspectives in terms of, you know, one being a team founder, one being more on the, you know, more on the like the business and getting folks involved at the play level side of, you know, what are the upsides, you know, or, and even the challenges and the opportunities for both of them from it. And I do think we're going to like hopefully have a through line that says like, hey, listen, you know, it'll be, you know, July of 2024, you know, what does esports look like? You know, it's honestly the same questions that we ask when we're talking about any industry, any sport that I work on. It's how is this going to look next year? How is it going to look in 3 years? And how is it going to look in, you know, in 10 years? And where does this, you know, where does that place, you know, the ones of us that'll be on stage, you know, and what roles are we all going to play? And I'd say that's inclusive of you too, in getting the industry to that point and where we can support it. So I think it's going to be great. I'm planning on spending some time when I'm on vacation this week with pen and pad, trying to certainly work on being the best moderator I can be, and making sure that everyone that comes leaves our session wishing that we had another 45 minutes to sit and listen to us all talk. So we'll see if we can achieve that goal.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for the panel. It's such a unique joint panel of perspectives with, you know, obviously you are moderating. You've got the traditional sports lens. Marco Maru, founder of M80, formerly of Xset, will be speaking on the panel, as well, and Juan Lavelle of the Bragg House, speaking on collegiate and brands and that level of engagement. So we're so excited to have you. For those listening and watching, you know, if you enjoyed this episode, if you heard something you want to learn more from with Ben, Esports Next is absolutely the place to do that. So please come join us July 7th through 9th in Chicago. We're looking forward to getting together and having a wonderful time. And Ben, thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us today on the Esports Next podcast.
My pleasure. Can't wait to see you guys next month in person.
See you soon.
Thanks, Ben.